Last episode, I talked about my adoption story and the catalyst behind the search. And at the end, I talked about finding out something shocking. Well, I have an update. If you're new here, I'm Allie, a Korean adoptee who recently reconnected with her birth family. I am documenting what happens after the birth search is over. So we left off talking about something that completely changed everything. And that's that I have a brother and he has no idea I exist. Well, that's not true. Let me take that back. Since the last time we spoke, I have found out that he has been told that I exist, but he does not believe it. So that's what I wanted to get in and talk about today. Honestly, I can't blame him. You imagine being raised by your family for 30 plus years, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, your dad looks at you and says, "Oh, by the way, we had another child and we gave her up for adoption and she lives on the other side of the world and have a great day." Don't blame him at all for not believing. And I can only imagine what it felt like finding out that your parents have lied to you for your entire life, because I remember when I found out that, I want to make sure that the kids are away before I say this. When I found out that Santa wasn't real. And the story behind it is that I had a close friend and we were supposed to be going skiing after the holidays. And she told me, my mom told me that you were getting new skis from Santa. And I was like, well, how does she know that? And she said, oh, because your mom told mine. And I pieced it together. And I remember I was actually skiing when she was telling me this. And I remember getting to the bottom of the hill and I was irate. I was so angry. Yes, I was disappointed finding out that Santa, this mythical person, was not real. But I remember looking at my mom in the face and saying, I can't believe that you lied to me. And that was the most upsetting part of finding out that Santa wasn't real, was that my parents had been lying to my face. Having that memory and remembering the feelings that I had, I absolutely can understand the frustration and the anger that he may have felt when he found out that, guess what, we've been lying to you for your whole life. Initially, I found out from my birth father in one of the early letters that he sent that my birth mother and birth father, who were unmarried at the time that they had me, ended up getting married and then had a son shortly thereafter. They ended up getting a divorce and they haven't been in contact really since. So even though the letter and me being told was anticlimactic, it felt like the floor gave out beneath me because it's something that I never ever expected. The reason I didn't expect it is because when I was adopted from my specific agency in Korea, there was a form that was completed that had all of the information: weight, height, name, things like that. In that form, there was a space where you could fill in whatever information the parent wanted to divulge. So in my case, it was my biological mother who was completing the form, and then she included certain information about her and my birth father. For me, I was fortunate in that she provided a fair amount of information, like their names, their ages, where they met, what happened, a little bit of a description about who they were, and the reason that they decided to give me up for adoption. They were unmarried. She was a student in college when they met. She didn't think that they would be in a position to raise a child, especially out of wedlock. In the 1980s, it was very taboo to have a child out of wedlock. There was a stigma attached. So I always viewed that act as an act of love, an act of kindness, because they were giving me up in the hopes that I would have a better future. I always assumed that I would have siblings because I thought they were young when they met, they were unmarried, they must have gone on to live their lives, met their spouses, had other children, started a family. So it was always in the back of my mind that I would have what I thought would be half siblings. So to find out that I have a full biological brother was shocking. Not only to find out that I had a biological brother, but that it happened in such a quick time of having me. They got married and had another baby within 2 years of having me. So the timeline just adds a lot more questions. What happened? You went from being an unwed couple to now all of a sudden having a full-blown family, it was hard to reconcile. And it changed the narrative of why I was being given up, even though he still says that the reason was because they were unwed and not in a position to raise a child. Questions started creeping in about whether they actually gave me up for that reason or because they wanted a son. And you have to remember that this was the 1980s in Korea, and it was a very patriarchal society. So there was a big emphasis on having a male heir, especially as the first child, having them continue your legacy. While it didn't rise to the level of China's one child policy, there was definitely a huge preference put on having a son as your firstborn child. So I've had this document, I've read it, I can't tell you how many times. And I always got this feeling of my family gave me up in the hopes of a better life, an act of love. Finding out that they did end up getting married, had a son who they kept and raised shortly after me, gave me a lot of doubts about the narrative that I had crafted in my head based on the initial paperwork. When I found this information out, I was obviously feeling a lot of different emotions. The emotion that I kept coming back to was grief. It was twofold, I guess. One, because I was grieving the identity of who I would have been if I had been in their family, if I had grown up with them, if they had raised me. What would my life have looked like? Sitting with those feelings has been really difficult, and I'm still trying to work through them because at the end of the day, I can't change what happened. I can't change the history. Learning to come to terms with it is something I need to do in order to continue healing. Then grief for the relationship that I could have had with my younger brother, but then also just grieving the loss of having a sibling somewhere that you've never met. One of the things that adoptees talk a lot about is growing up in a household where nobody looks like you. I grew up in a household where my parents were white, and I have an adopted brother who's older. We're not biologically the same, and we really don't look alike, but people consistently said that we did, I think just because we were both Korean. So I didn't grow up necessarily without having any exposure to Korean features and things like that, but I didn't have what the researchers call genetic mirroring, thing that you get from growing up in a household with people who are biologically related to you. And it's something that the adoptees do not have. To know that there's someone else in this world who shares your DNA but is out of reach is a humbling type of grief because they're still alive. You've never met them, but you're connected in this really deep and personal way. There was just this overarching feeling of grief. Another feeling that I wasn't expecting was rejection. This is a common feeling for adoptees, is feeling that they were rejected by their biological family. And the truth is, for me, I never really had that feeling because I read the paperwork and I thought that they were giving me up for adoption because I needed a better life and they wanted me to have better opportunities that I wouldn't have been afforded if I stayed with them. To find out that they in fact did get married and then went on to have their own family was a feeling of rejection that I really was not expecting to feel. That's where I am right now. He is told that I exist, but he doesn't believe it. We're sitting in opposite countries on the other sides of the world, not knowing anything about each other. I've thought about it a lot. I've thought about what it would mean to reach out, what it would mean to meet. For now, I'm really just trying to work through the feelings and process the new information and sit with how I'm feeling before making any rash decisions. If you've ever found out that you have a sibling or a family member who you never knew about, I would love to hear. I've received a lot of comments sharing your different experiences. Honestly, wasn't expecting that. And that's the whole reason that I started this channel, to document and get the conversation started and be able to share each other's experiences. In the next video, I'm going to talk about my adopted family, what it was like telling them about my birth family search, what changed, and what has stayed the same. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I will see you there next week.